Hi, folks. My name is Erica Miners, and I'm here in a basement in Chicago today. And I am super excited to be in conversation with the brilliant Bree Newsome Bass and Derecka Purnell. And we're talking about all things abolition today. We are engaging the new project that we want to talk about, abolition for the people, and it's every time is the right time to build abolition, and now feels particularly important. So I just want to start by thanking our fabulous tech support and our Haymarket team, but also all the folks that made this event possible and this project possible. I want to have deep gratitude to Emory Douglas for the incredible cover, the beautiful, beautiful, beautiful cover, and folks like Connie Woon, Chris Petrella, and also the Haymarket team and the visionary people and contributors and the wider movements that are reflected in this really important project. So today we're going to be talking about all things abolition. We're going to do a little bit of 101. We're also going to forefront Palestine in our conversation today. I also want to learn from and with Derecka and Bree about local struggles that you two are learning from, working with, engaging from. I want to talk a little bit about the political moment that we're in related to abolitionist movements, the white lash, front lash, or backlash that we're in this moment. I want to talk about the role of art in our movements, and maybe the election, and also maybe we'll get to people's astrological signs. I don't know, it depends on the day. But I want to offer, before I pivot with some questions, I want to offer an introduction to our just two fabulous contributors to this project, and thinkers and doers and world makers that we're going to be talking with today, Derecka Purnell and Bree Newsome Bass. I'm going to just offer quick bios for both of these two. But for Bree Newsome Bass is an award-winning writer, filmmaker, and grassroots community organizer, most widely known for her act of civil disobedience in 2015 when she scaled a 30-foot flagpole at the South Carolina Capitol and lowered the Confederate flag in protest following racist murders of 9 Black parishioners during a prayer meeting at the Emmanuel AME in Charleston. Her actions in collaboration with a team of other activists led to the permanent removal of the flag 2 weeks later and inspired similar efforts to remove racist symbology around the nation. Bass remains a vocal critic of modern structural racism, giving lectures on the topic while promoting the importance of local organizing and the role of art, media, and communications in movement building. Welcome, Bree. And Derecka Purnell. Welcome. Derecka is a human rights lawyer, writer, and organizer. She works to end police and prison violence by providing legal assistance, research, and trainings to community-based organizations through an abolitionist framework. Purnell received her JD from Harvard Law School and her BA from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, yay, and studied public policy and economics at the University of California, Berkeley, and as a public policy and international affairs fellow. Her writing, her powerful writing, is so many places: the New York Times, the Atlantic, Teen Vogue, yes, The Appeal, Truth Out, Slate, Boston Review, and In These Times. So welcome both Bree and Derecka, and we're going to jump right in. And I'm going to start off with Derecka, and I'm wondering if Derecka, you can start our conversation today with a working definition for you of abolition, and maybe a little bit, and you've shared this powerfully in other contexts, so I'm just inviting you to share again today a little bit about how you moved into being an abolitionist thinker and organizer. So I'm going to turn to you with that opening question. Thank you.
Yes, of course. But did you introduce yourself? I mean, we know you.
No, I feel like I'm hoping my image goes off while you answer that. So I'm hoping you're starting.
Introduce yourself.
I'll introduce myself before the next set of questions. So I'm going to move to you with the first question.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. Very excited to be here with you and Bree, and always excited to throw down with my Haymarket family. A working definition of abolition. Okay, all right. So in 2020, when 26 million people in the United States rose up in response to the murder of George Floyd. And hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people across the world also did that. I realized that there were a lot of people very earnestly, very excitedly identifying as abolitionists. Because I think that was one, I don't know, maybe very tragic source of inspiration to realize that this system isn't working, right? All of these reforms, everything that we've been promised to stop police killings just was not working. And I guess, I can't believe this is almost 4 years ago, but since then, I have met lots of people who, again, very earnestly take on the abolitionist title, but then haven't really grappled with what it means to be abolitionist or can define or articulate abolitionist because they haven't struggled with a political home. So, for example, can be an abolitionist, but then not have a critique of capitalism. Like, I've heard people identify as an abolitionist, but then just have no critique of colonialism. So the working definition that's been really helpful to me, and this isn't my personal definition, this is informed by years of struggle, decades of abolitionists thinking critically alongside other liberatory frameworks, centuries of people trying to abolish police and prisons. But what's helpful for me in the clarity is when I say abolition, I'm talking about abolishing and ending carceral problems, colonial problems, capitalist problems, and community-based problems at the same time over time, right? Doing these things at the same time over time while building the future and the present relationships that we want. So we can be in more just relationships to each other, to our communities and to the planet, right? That is how I tend to think of abolition now. Like the idea that abolition means to make 18,000 law enforcement agencies disappear overnight or 1 million cops go. Like that's just absence, right? We're not just trying to make these individual pieces of the carceral state disappear, right? We're not just trying to stop one person from pulling someone over and that leads to another statistic. We're trying to eliminate the reasons why people think they need police, why people think they need borders, why people resort to violence to their partners, to strangers, to their children, right? Really taking on violence up front so that we can eliminate the source of oppression, whether it's a major state apparatus, maybe it's a bomb, maybe it's a military, but the goal is to eradicate that violence and figure out how to be in a much more justice-centered world, the one that we've had, versions of that we had, right, and the one that we deserve.
Oh, thanks for that. I love the reminder that it's not just it's not just the manifestations or the symptoms or the structures or the institutions or the, the bodies of the police, but it's actually the underlying belief systems that are like the water we swim in. That's what we got to change. Right. So thank you for that. Bree, I appreciate in your really powerful contribution here into our project and also in the wider work that you've done, this keen focus on the trap of reform. And can you just remind us, kind of building from Derecka's sort of powerful kind of working idea of abolition, why, isn't that what abolitionists want? Things to be fixed, right? What's wrong with reform? Why can't we just have nicer prisons, right? Or 4 new neighborhood jails in New York and that so-called feminist prison that they're still proposing to build up in Harlem, right? What's wrong with reforms?
Absolutely. So first, did you want to introduce yourself, Erica? Because
I'm avoiding that. Because I feel like
I wasn't sure that was like an intentional trying to dodge. I don't want to make you do anything that's uncomfortable. Yeah. Did you want to? You sure you good?
Yeah, I'm great. Okay.
All right. Okay. Well, so reform. What are we reforming? That's my question. And I say this. I really appreciate Derecka's approach in terms of like explaining her own personal evolution, because I think that's a lot of us, if not most of us, right? I don't think most of us are kind of brought up indoctrinated into the system and accepting that as the status quo and not even questioning, some of these concepts. And so I think as somebody who has also moved from the reform, like believing like the goal is to reform, to saying, no, I think the abolitionists are right, we need to support abolition, is the question, what are we reforming? What are we reforming? And I think that's where it comes to the question of colonialism, right? Where I don't think there's any way to really discuss or describe the systems that we are living under without talking about colonialism, right? And slavery and genocide. I mean, these are the bases of the systems, all the structures that we're talking about, the prison system, housing, you name it, right? This is what it extends from. And so then I think the question becomes, why are we reforming it? Why are we reforming colonialism? Why are we reforming slavery? Why are we reforming genocide? You know, and I mean, when I look at what's happening in Palestine, obviously, I mean, that's a perfect example of, oh, we're going to reform genocide because we're going to find a way to do it where it's tucked away and out of sight. And if you really pay attention to the conversations, I mean, a lot of the mainstream conversation in the West, that's what it centers around. It's how do we take this brutally violent system and make it less uncomfortable? How do we make it more out of sight? It's not really about ending any, and this is even people who are, you know, genuinely trying to improve things, make reform. I often find that when you start to go down the conversation, you know, what you run into is oftentimes folks like me. If you had talked to me 15 years ago, I would have been like, what do you mean? That's not possible. How can that even be possible? But it's because we have been taught to think that colonialism, capitalism, slavery, racism, it's like all of these things are normal. That's just how it is. And the best that we could do is try to make things a little bit more comfortable for ourselves. So I don't think reform is possible. We cannot reform slavery into anti-slavery, into freedom, right? And so I don't want to reform it. And I think Derecka and I think we both have shared this sentiment a lot. Like, I don't want to reform slavery. I don't want to diversify my oppressors. You know, that's not what I need. I support abolition. And I just want to be clear, like, I don't want to put myself forward as somebody who is leading on abolition. I support the abolitionists. I'm one of the people who, when I was first encountering it, and I was like, what do you mean? What is that? How is that possible? But it's the only thing that's possible. Abolition is much more practical than reform. We have tried reform. We have earnestly tried reform. It's not reformable, or it is reformable, but it's not going to be liberation.
Yeah, I so appreciate all of the points you're making, and I too am almost like often skeptical of like conversion narratives. So I also appreciate your your modeling of like grappling with like, this is like how to, and I maybe I'll just have one follow-up question for you. Is just, if you could talk, you said about 15 years ago you moved, right? And I'm wondering if you feel comfortable just sharing, what precipitated that, reading, books, experience, or work, just for our listeners.
Sure. I mean, I think I'm like everybody, where there's probably collective experiences over your life that kind of shape your viewpoint. But for me, it was definitely like Occupy Wall Street, certainly like I think the Obama administration radicalized a lot of us. Just because I think the Obama administration was kind of like the proof that we can't reform it. That was kind of like, okay, it's really not possible. And so Occupy Wall Street, of course, Trayvon Martin. And not just the murder of Trayvon Martin, but the way that the case played out. Like, I would really kind of point to that as when I started to shift, because at the beginning it was like, arrest George Zimmerman, like that was the demand, and then they arrested him, and then we went through the whole process and we saw the process does not bring justice. So that's really, it's been kind of like an ongoing journey for me, and I'm still on that journey. I want to stress that to people, like, political education and growing and expanding and being willing to have your viewpoints challenged. I mean, that's something we should commit to for a lifetime.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, I mean, I also, I was sort of shying away from introducing myself, but I'm a writer and an organizer in Chicago and a teacher. And I've done different kinds of work. I'm a member of organizations like the Prison Neighborhood Arts and Education Project, Critical Resistance, Illinois Deaths in Custody work. And what I appreciate from your kind of pointing to this pathway of like learning and unlearning, what I'm also hearing loud and clear from you, that it's about practice, it's about work, that it's being attached to movements, engaged in movements where you see, okay, we're organizing, we're desperate for justice, yet the criminal legal system, in the example of Trayvon Martin that you so beautifully reminded us and brought into the conversation today, we didn't get that, right? So it's the work, it's the, what I'm hearing from you is it's doing the work that's like, you're realizing like, oh my God, the desire and the demand is for freedom, right? But yet, what are we getting fed back to us? I also just want to appreciate that you brought up colonialism and Palestine, Bree. So I want to turn to Derecka and just continue that or just pick up on that, a really important theme, this political moment. I'm here in Chicago. I'm in the basement of my building right now, but I feel like over the last several months, we've had, street actions, organizing, and I know, Derecka, you've been talking and writing and thinking and organizing in relation to Palestine as an abolitionist issue. And I'm wondering if you can just help connect for listeners and for all of us, what makes Palestine an abolitionist issue, an abolition feminist issue that we want to be thinking about and connecting our struggles here to shrink the 40% of the city of Chicago's operating budget that's spent on policing. How is that connected to our struggles and the work that's happening and the movement that we're trying to support in Palestine?
Yes, of course. And also completely 100% agree with everything Bree just said about those moments of being politicized, of placing your hope in a particular system. And I mean, we can add Troy Davis, right? There's so many of those moments. Michael Brown. I think what's also has been fascinating is even those moments where we quote win, right? About the moment that Derek Chauvin was found guilty and how people rejoiced. And on that same day, a cop killed Ma'Khia Bryant, right, in Ohio. And it was just, and police killings have increased. So there's this idea that if we increase lawsuits, increase settlements, increase convictions, then that's going to send a message. And at the same time, that we have more convictions than we ever had. We've had the highest amount of settlements. I mean, families getting millions of dollars literally because police stole the life of their loved one. Those things are happening while police killings are increasing, while cop cities are being built across the country, while the National Guard is being sent into the tunnels in New York City, right? As police budgets are expanding. And so what does that mean? It means people are going to be able to kill better, right? What Bree is talking about reform, they're going to make them better managers of inequality, better shooters, better tasers. This is ultimately what happens. And so I just wanted to make sure that I spoke to that. Regarding Palestine, I don't know if it's that I'm naive, but I am shocked and devastated that on March 28th, that we're still talking about witnessing a genocide. I'm shocked. And I think a lot of people are shocked by the spectacular nature of the violence, even though we know that this is, as Rashid Khalidi says, 100-year war, 100-year occupation. It's just that the magnitude and the scale and the complicity. I love when Michelle Alexander said on Democracy Now! Maybe a couple of weeks ago, that the Biden administration seems to be surprised that so many people would care. And I think that in this particular moment, watching the level of organizing in response to what's happening has been really inspiring. I just wish that, it didn't have to be because 30,000 people, nearly 40,000 people, and tens of thousands of more missing and under the rubble, hundreds of thousands, people starving, the increase in the attacks on our siblings living in the West Bank by settlers is devastating. And I think what also has been really pissing me off, because where I am right now, I'm at Columbia visiting as a fellow. I was at Toronto Metropolitan University a few days ago. I was at Harvard. I've been, the day before yesterday, I've been talking to students who are organizing on Spelman and Morehouse and Clark Atlanta's campus through Students for Justice in Palestine. And I'm witnessing all student repression, all the university repression of efforts speaking out, and people getting into these back and forth, when I know that who profits from this war does not give a damn about Jews, Israelis, Christians, Palestinians, Muslims. And they're able to hide behind these cultural claims to land because it fuels their bottom line. It fuels them as a weapons manufacturer. It fuels them as a capitalist who's going to be able to sell land that's stolen. And it makes me so angry, because all of that gets shrunk into, do you condemn what happened October 7th? And it's like, well, there's a military industrial complex that is at play here that we have to condemn, we have to undermine, and we have to overthrow, right? There's a prison industrial complex that's happening here. So Palestine, a former colony of Britain, we know that all of the colonies of Britain, guess when they got their first police force? It was under the occupation. We see the first well-maintained police department form when Britain is occupying Ireland. But that's true in Ghana, right? That's true. If you look at all of these former colonies, they don't get their first police departments until France, Spain, Portugal, and Britain colonized them. And so it's really important that we talk about that history through our story, like in the telling, the colonial history, in the telling, the development. It wasn't like we have to leave because people were simply being bad. We had police because being bad meant running away. It meant resisting colonialism. It meant resisting slavery, right? This is the bad things that people were resisting that resulted in a need for a force to control them, to raid their homes, to put cuffs on their wrists, to put cuffs around their necks and their legs. This is what it meant to control them. So it's indispensable. It's so important. I think when I listen to Palestinians discuss administrative detention, that Israel has the power to hold them for 6 months for no reason, right? My friends who've done delegations, who visited people in the West Bank, who say, yes, I was let go of prison after 5 years, and I returned to another prison in Gaza, right? So listening to people fear, well, if something does happen to me because I resisted, I'm going to be tried in a military court where there's a 99% conviction rate, right? And even the mainframe, one of the first things that I remember hearing happen on October 7th and October 8th, were people saying, well, if Gaza is the largest open air prison on the planet, well, maybe we should see this as people breaking out of prison. I think people are not only thinking about a prison and police in terms of a typical, concrete wall with bars, but also as a border, prison as a border, prison as a nation state, as a fight to have a nation state. And I think my learning from that really came from being in South Africa, looking at and learning about the struggle and solidarity between Palestinians and South Africans, particularly those in Soweto who were resisting the white apartheid regime. Looking up those signs from the 80s that said abolish Afrikaners, right? The language of abolition, all through our movement for the last 200, 300 years. And being like, wow. So when you study the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, it's thousands of pages. When you study it and you learn that the police report that shot down all those Black South African students were helped to set up by the Israeli apartheid regime. Like, that's who trained South Africa. And when I look at organizers in Jewish Voice for Peace, organized through their program to end the deadly exchange, to stop police officers in the United States from training with police officers in Israel and the IDF. Not that the police in the United States need any place in the world to teach them how to be racist and cruel and repressive, right? It doesn't need Israel to do that, but I'm looking at people make these connections and make these interventions and create campaigns to organize and to stop them.
Yes, thank you for thank you for that response. And I'm just thinking about, bringing in internationalism into this conversation and the ways in which the prison industrial complex is an internationalist, and also then resistance, as I'm thinking about critical resistance and all the groups that fought for many years when Oakland was the sort of site where Israeli forces came to do sort of mock war games with police forces in the United States. I can't remember the name of that campaign, but they worked for many years to try to stop that from happening. So absolutely, I just want to lift up that both the resistance and what we're learning from that, and that long history of that resistance. So thank you. That's making me think a little bit about Bree. You're an organizer, but you're also an artist and a filmmaker. And I'm a little bit late to the party on cultural production being central to movement work. I feel like I came out of a background of labor movements, and and I am a little bit late to thinking about the imperative of having cultural production as part of our movements. So can you offer some examples of either some of the work that you're following, music and art, that's contributing to building abolition, to decolonial work, to kind of creating the work that the world that we know we need?
Yeah, well, first of all, don't feel bad, because I was late to it too. And I was a trained artist. I knew I wanted to be an artist from as long as I can remember. But coming into the understanding of art and cultural production as an essential part of movement, that's something I came into awareness being involved in movement. And it's interesting to me, you talk about from your perspective coming from the labor movement, and for me, it was the opposite. It was like I was coming from art and then learning about the labor movement. And so now, in response to your question, I'm here for the burning of the entertainment industry. I'm just going to put that out there. I think that there's so much about being an artist that is antithetical to capitalism. And I think we all struggle with that in a very, very real way. And I think that this most recent conversation around AI, the conversation around labor practices in the entertainment industry, whether that's from pay to systemic abuse, right? I think all of that is a byproduct of capitalism and trying to kind of wed those things together. So I am excited for the people that are breaking free. I'm excited for everybody that is speaking up. I am excited for all of us who are just going to do this independent thing. I mean, a lot of us end up working independently because it's not an option, but industry is not necessarily an option. But I do think that there's a growing labor awareness in the arts community. You know what I mean? Like I think there's a long overdue labor movement in the arts. Not that there hasn't been a labor movement in the arts, but you understand what I'm saying? Like when we deal with the realization that we're having major films produced and there are no union enforcements actually happening on set, and the abuse is endemic. I mean, I think those are the things that we have to think about as creators. It's not just what is the product that we're putting out there, what is it that we are creating, but how are we creating it? Because all of that, I think this goes back to Derecka's definition of abolition. It's about a whole new way of being and existing. We end up with endemic abuse in the arts because everything is about the quickest profit, and the motivation for everything being driven by profit and by exploitation kills everything. Most notably the arts. So I'm excited. I think that it's happening, but I think we're going to see more of it. I think there's going to be more of the cultural production, more of this awareness of consciously producing things that are reflecting back to us what we're seeing. Because right now, honestly, a lot of the stuff that we're getting, especially industry and corporate, it's disconnected from what's happening among people. And I think that's where it's for us as artists to really step in there more and let's make some art.
Love that. Derecka, I'm going to just, do you have anything that you're listening to or you're paying attention to that's sort of like in cultural creative work that's like giving you ideas or feelings that are kind of building towards abolition? Just out of
building towards abolition. Yeah. Well, listening to Kendrick Lamar confirmed to abolish Drake, but we can see that in another Haymarket conversation. One thing I can share in terms of cultural production is that a group of people. I have a child. Hey, my love, I'm doing an event right now. Can you come back later? But that's how to say hi. I know, but this is. That's
okay. Hi.
Okay. Can you say hi?
Hi.
Okay. Hi. Love you. You have to leave. Love you. Love you. Love you.
Love that.
No question right now.
Pets, love small people, love any kind of interruptions on a Skype or Zoom.
Can you lock the door, please? Yes. You have a key. Yes. Oh, wow, clever. Talk about breaking doors and borders. I get it. Okay. I see. Thank you. You can join the next time, okay? Sorry. Yes, okay. So one thing, so I've been organizing with Dream Defenders and a group of people, including Delaney Vandergriff, Clarissa Brooks, Niall Ford, who else? Katie Pettit. A group of us, there's a small team of us, and what we've been trying to do is figure out, well, with some of the early marches around Palestine, we noticed that in Black communities, there's been a long history of solidarity, but for some of the early marches, there wasn't the kind of turnout that we anticipated that when we were planning marches and protests and being in the streets. And so we had this idea of creating cultural spaces that we've been calling Dear Gaza, love notes on Black and Palestinian solidarity. And what essentially we've done instead of doing a panel is created opportunities for people to sit at tables, to break bread, to write letters to our siblings in Gaza and in the Palestinian diaspora, and we're going to get those letters translated. And what we noticed in pulling those people together, we would ask, how long have you been a part of the movement for a free Palestine? And people raising hand for 5 days or 5 years, and actually. For the one that we did in Harlem, William Patterson's daughter came and she raised her hand and said, 40 years. And it was just such a really beautiful, engaging way for people to really learn from each other and share stories about all kinds of solidarity. And it's like I haven't thought of myself as a cultural organizer, so this has been like the first thing that I was like, I think we need something that's more intimate that can also contribute to a measure of solidarity for people who may be afraid to protest or who may not be connected to some of the organizations who are primarily, going on Instagram and doing text and on Signal. As well, how do we also make phone calls? We were calling people and saying, hey, this thing is happening, connecting to Black churches and places of faith. Doing this with local community-based organizations who have chapters who were like, yeah, we saw something about, people going into the streets, but we didn't know who's behind it. And so just really trying to use art, writing, food, music. Some more Pender Hughes performed at the one in Harlem, right? Just pulling Remy Kazani. So many amazing people just showed up and just, were able to connect with people. And then that became a way for a new generation. By generation, I don't just mean a new group of young people, but an intergenerational group of people who are energetic about showing up in this moment. And that's been giving me a lot of, I don't know if joy is the right word, but it just has confirmed that people are really interested in intimate spaces where they get to also produce. So now we have hundreds of letters, right, of all these, sheets of paper. We've been posting that as galleries for people to read and to mourn together and to rejoice together, and as encouragement. And we figured, well, we have people writing to Congress, we have people doing open letters, we have people writing to everybody but people in Palestine. So how can we also make this intervention that also serves as a basis of our organizing and of our solidarity?
Can I say something to that real quick?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think what you touched on is so important, which is that everybody contributes to the cultural production. And I think even that idea that only some of us create and some of us consume is very capitalistic. And I mean, if you think about it, like, we all create things. Like, I don't know exactly like when this idea came about that like only certain people are like creative, only certain people are artists and they pursue it as a profession. But really, that's not how we make culture. And I think if we operate with that awareness, like in the way that Derecka just laid out, I think that's really important as far as like changing the way that we tend to like interpret or internalize some of these capitalistic values and viewpoints. Yeah.
Oh, I totally agree. I super appreciate that. I was just thinking about some of the logic that I had was from my mother, rest in power, who was like, you got to be able to get a job, Erica, so, which is like sort of also capitalist logic. So I want to appreciate that. And I also I appreciate the sort of the Derecka bringing sort of intimacy in the room, because I think when we're talking about how we want to reimagine safety and reclaim safety from a carceral punitive to a way that is a flourishing life pathway for all. I mean, that is policy work, that is structural work, but also that's intimate work, right? And we have to have like places and spaces that are creating that. And I think about, my own history of being involved in all kinds of projects supporting people in prison, and how transformative even the act of like letter writing to people inside within the confines of the U.S. settler colonial nation state is. Like, that is can be for people like a gateway drug, like a transformative experience to get them to think about and build relationships with people that seem like they're in a different planet. So I just want to lift up that, bringing in intimacy, and also Bree, your idea of like every day, every day where I think about the kind of the many campaigns and projects that I'm involved in making the flyers for those events, like the flyers for the $500 fundraiser we're having in a backyard, right, that we make, or the garage sale we had last summer that put money on people's commissary accounts. Like, the images that we create for those events are also beautiful and powerful, and we wouldn't call them art, but they're cultural production that is pedagogical as well, that is educating the people on Instagram that are seeing it, or whatever crappy platform it is. So I just want to lift up this intimacy idea, and also this idea of everydayness. And I think that's one thing. I feel like I'm a bad pitch person today, but that's one thing that I think I really love this project, because it's beautiful, but it also has different kinds of contributions from, of course, you fabulous folks, but that are intimate, every day, and accessible. And I'm a little sad that Professor Laymon is not with us today, because he has this beautiful kind of conversation with just a powerful mom who's lost her son. And I think it also just reminds us of the necessity of having intimacy in the work, right, and having storytelling. I want to move to the political moment that we're in, and I know we're going to shift in a minute to see if there's any audience Q&A. But I want to, I feel like we're in such a predictable and a expected moment of repression, backlash, front lash, white lash, whatever we want to call it. And I'm wondering if you both can kind of speak to the moment that we're in, about how to build safety, because I think for those of us that are supporting or engaged in Palestinian as being vocal and visible about support for Palestinian lives and pushing back on repression, like any strategies there, but also how do we keep our communities and support our communities to continue the work around the demands to defund when there's fewer of us in the streets, but the demand is still salient. So my question is sort of for both of you about the political moment that we're in, and around pushing back on repression, but also at the same time finding the community to continue the push and continue the work when we're not at the same moment that we were a couple of years ago. So there's no, of course, I teach there's no right answer here, but you're both brilliant, so I want to know what you're thinking. And maybe Derecka, can you start us off?
Yes. So strategy, I cannot talk on here because it wouldn't be that strategic for some of the things that I think is necessary to continue to raise the stakes in this particular moment. I think the most surface level that I can say is for students, I've been primarily talking to students on camp. Well, maybe like now, at this point, like 60-40, talking to students who, it makes me very angry how administrators, again, are coming down on students who spend so much energy on these campaigns, and then the tactics to undermine their organizing puts them in a position where they have to now shift to defending themselves from the repression, right? From, at TMU, 1/6 of the student body is facing expulsion at the law school for signing on the letter to support Palestine, right? So now you have, okay, well, all of the organizing we're doing around Palestine is now like, well, how do we defend ourselves against getting expelled? And there are students who are still organizing and doing both very importantly. But I think it just speaks to how much more important it is for student organizers to be connected to organizers off campus, to movement lawyers, to staff who are, in many cases, even more vulnerable than some of the students, right? So it's like, how do we create a robust network where, for people who are willing to engage in organizing work, risky organizing work, direct actions, to do that? And if they are threatened with, repression or discipline, have a team prepared to, that's their goal, to take that on, to free people up to continue to doing the mobilizing work. I think that's something I've been thinking about. The other thing that I probably say all the time, I'm sure I've already said it here, is that this is an exciting time to find a political home. And by political home, I mean a group of people that you and I are willing to struggle with around ideas, around the kind of people we want to be in society, and the kind of campaigns that we want to work on. I think that what's exciting about mobilization is that it can feel sexy, even when it's scary, to look at the strength of a movement by the number of people who enter into the street. Right? It's like, oh man, largest movement, largest mobilization, look at all these marches. And I think that's amazing. I think for those of us who are in political homes, we're trying to figure out, okay, what does that mean in terms of absorption? Do those mobilizations build and sustain long-term power? How many new members do we have as a result of millions going into the street? And not that means that we need to exponentially grow our organizations, but our organization should grow and have more people who are doing the work, and doing the work not as full-time paid staff, like people who are bus drivers and still a part of a political campaign, people who are teachers and daycare workers and still a part of a campaign, people who work at nail salons and still decide to go to meetings on Saturdays. Like, that's the kind, we have to figure out how to shift people from just the like, share, subscribe model, follow, donate model, right? And now people are in the streets and say, okay, we need more mobilization. We need more people getting trained. And there also has to be amazing containers built to build long-term power to shift the conditions that we're ultimately organizing for.
Love that. I want to just lift up before I go to Bree. We're going to come to electoral politics or not in a minute, but I love that your reminder for people to make like a safety plan, like movement lawyers, like connecting, especially, connecting to other communities, like build a base. I just want to lift that up. And I was just, thinking about my family policing crew. How do we move from outrage to action? Like, what's the on-ramp for that? What are the containers for that? So thanks for those. And also, yes, not going to put your strategy on blast, because then it's maybe not a strategy. So thank you, Derecka. Bree, strategies that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like Derecka covered it. Like, I don't really have much more to add. I mean, I struggle with the concept of safety, like what that means, because I think it's more of a perception than a reality. And a lot of times when we talk about, like, how do we, you're speaking up, you're being outspoken, you're protesting, the dangers that come with it. But I also think about the people that are constantly harmed by the system who did nothing. It's like most of the people who end up kind of becoming, the banner causes or cases are people who they weren't targeted because they were political or something that they were doing, you know. So I think that we should not allow that, like the fear of being targeted because you speak up, to dictate how we move, because especially in a moment like this, I really think the more numbers we have, the louder we have, the more open we are about being rebellious and ungovernable, the better, because I think ultimately that is what keeps us safe. They can't lock us all up. So if that's the whole theory behind it, is like, if everybody, the more of us that resist, the harder it is for them to control any of us or target just one of us, you know? So yeah, I think basically the response to that is exactly what Derecka was talking about, which is community and connection. There's no, I'll just give you real quick. I was looking at, like emergency, medical, like basic medical training, like if somebody gets injured, just upping your ability to do, just kind of like basic emergency response. And one of the first things that they said was that get a team of people to train with you, because there's no situation where somebody's going to need some kind of medical attention and you are going to be able to handle that by yourself unless you're training with a team. So, I think the answer to everything is community and sustained organization.
Yeah, which connects back to sort of Derecka's reminder, push, gentle nudge to kind of find a container or a political home, that you want that you can grow with, the people that you can have principled struggle with, that you can be in relation to, that you can build with, that you can experiment with, practice with, try things, right? And that's a long haul, right? That's a long haul set of relationships and organizing. So I feel I would just want to return to that, but thank you, Bree. So now we have some great questions in the from the crew, and I'm just going to read a couple of them aloud, and I think some of them are directed towards one of you, but I think feel free, both of you, to jump in. And I think I'll start with the ones that are kind of coming back to some of the questions we asked, or I asked earlier, just to kind of either to reinforce those points or to rephrase those points. I've heard a lot. So here's one question. I've heard a lot of people talk about it's the difference between non-reformist reforms and reforms, right? I've heard a lot of people talk about non-reformist reforms as a rubric for thinking about the things we should fight for in the here and now. If you agree with this principle, can you offer some examples about non-reformist reforms? And then this is also kind of connected to that around reforms. Kind of connected to electoral politics. The case that Bree made about reforms not working is convincing, but does this mean we should be indifferent towards developments in electoral politics? If so, how can we navigate that contradiction? So maybe some examples about non-reformist reforms, or I think you said earlier that abolition is inherently incredibly practical, Bree, and I really appreciate that. Like, it's not some utopian pie in the sky. It's actually a vision of doing something to build the world that we know we need now. So what are some examples of that within the criminal legal sphere right now? And then also, how do we move in relation to electoral politics, right? So either one of you or both of you would be great for that. That's it.
Did you want to jump on the non-reformist reform, Derecka?
You can start. I know I've been going first a lot. So
I know my not so great moderation skills. I feel like I probably should pick one of you.
No. I just thought Derecka might have some precise examples, because I have a thought of what I would describe as one, but.
Oh yeah, so non-reformist reforms, that language comes out of socialism, there is this, what's his name, Andre Gorz, is right, this French socialist who says, well, I don't think that we can just necessarily get from capitalism to communism or capitalism to, we need stages, and we need to fight for practical ways to undermine capitalism while attending to our needs kind of right now. And so I think it's kind of cool that abolitionists have taken on non-reformist reforms in probably obviously in thinking with a lot of socialist literature to deal with the conditions that we have right now, to make sure that we are not giving the carceral state, and again, when I say the carceral state, I'm talking about the systems of prisons, police, prosecutors, the criminal legal system, all that keep it intact, the industries that benefit from it, right? How can we how can we make a change to the carceral state that doesn't give it more legitimacy? How can we make a change that undermine it? So here's a quick example. When we think about police departments, we can say, here's this police department. It's terrible for all these reasons. Let's make all the cops gay. Let's just make them gay. Let's make them black. Let's make them gay. Throw some women in there. Throw some children of immigrants. Because clearly, if we have a more diverse police department, that's going to be a good reform so that police can improve their tactics, okay? And then you look at diverse police departments like Chicago and St. Louis and New York City or Puerto Rico, right? And you're like, oh, wow, diversity actually doesn't lend itself to the kind of change that we want. So that is a reformist reform. A non-reformist reform would be let's have a complete moratorium on the number of police academies that are developing. And alongside that moratorium, let's try to see where is violence happening in our city. And instead of sending cops there, moving money from police budgets and experimenting with people who don't work with law enforcement to do street violence interruption or to do the Healing and Justice Center like they do with Dream Defenders in Miami. Right? So that's a non-reformist reform in that it's not giving more money to police. It's not expanding their power, the scope of their power. It's not giving them, more legitimacy and support and praise. It's not doing any of that. Instead, it's freezing it and taking a piece of what they're doing out of their hands and into a different kind of change that's going to yield something more productive for our community. So that's one of the ways that I think of, and critical resistance has really good literature. I know, right? On non-reformist, more on like abolitionist reforms versus reformist reforms. And they have these great pamphlets. That's why I was just Googling, because I know they have one around police. I think they also have one about prisons. And so many organizations at this point have produced, Aid to Abolition, BYP 100, Dream Defenders have produced documents, political education, saying, here are some things you should always oppose because they give more power and more money. Here are some things that we could be fighting for that we can do right now. That we don't have to wait to eliminate all the social ills in the world before we can demand this right now.
I just want to appreciate you for shouting out, both of you, but just in that specific response for shouting out so many organizations that are doing this work of abolitionist practice. And of course, our collection, has many of those people from those organizations kind of writing about the work that they're doing. And I think coming back to the point about a political home, if people are looking for ways to get connected or ways to learn, of course you can create your own organization, and we in the United States are very good at that, but we can also look at the organizations that are already existing and the political education that they have developed and form study groups where we're reading the work of Derecka, following the work of Bree, like looking at the work that Critical Resistance has created, the political education materials, skilling up, and there's so many important tools out there that people are using. So I just want to appreciate that, and also appreciate the example of policing. I'm in the city of Chicago. There's always an ongoing discussion about whether a civilian police accountability review board is a reform, is an abolitionist reform. But it's like, so I think that these are really important, questions that we need to have, principled struggle over. Like, is this just expanding the scope of policing, putting more money into policing, or to come back to Bree's earlier point, reproducing the logics of policing, because we also want to get at that white supremacist, capitalist, settler, colonial, ableist, heteropatriarchy that's kind of at the base here. So it's no use, like Chicago just canceled our $33 million investment for policing in schools, in Chicago police schools. Wonderful, a win, a long win from many years of people organizing. But we don't want, what does a comrade of mine call it, like counselors, cops in cardigans, like doing the work that policing did, and having social workers do that work, right? So we got to also do the work of kind of like challenging the underlying beliefs that make those symptoms possible. So thank you, Derecka. So now I'm going to pivot to you, Bree, for the hard electoral politics question, which just feels so, always urgent, but particularly urgent in this moment. How do we engage that contradiction about, that Derecka has just so beautifully laid out this, we need to be doing, radical work as in root work and not, not just, what does Ruthie call it? Tinkering. Ruth Wilson Gilmore calls it tinkering with Armageddon, right? What does that mean in the face of electoral politics and this political moment where it's, it feels, to me, as my little Canadian self, incredibly heavy. So thanks, Bree.
So, I would start here. Excuse me. My stance, and my stance has been this for at least a year or so, is that the United States is not holding a constitutional election. So I am reluctant, at least on the federal level. There is not, if you were talking about a rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, that is only happening because we have already negated the Constitution. So I think it's important when we are talking, yes, there's electoralism in America in general, right? Which is a conversation you're talking about, it's always urgent. And, can we afford to not engage with it? And my answer every previous election cycle would absolutely be, we can't, we have to have some kind of strategy. Like, if you look at the opposition has a strategy for everything. They've got an electoral strategy. They have a militant strategy. They have a media strategy. So we need to have a strategy on our side. We have to have a plan. The thing is that the electoral system, especially at the federal level, at this point, and I kind of agree with people who pinpoint Citizens United as really the end in a lot of ways, because the control that money has over our politics at this point in time is such that I don't think it's possible. Like, I don't believe that we can speak in terms of having a liberal democracy where we elect our leaders and we advocate for, policy change, and we go and we meet with them at their offices and we call them. That's not real. Like maybe there may have been a time where we could debate how real that was in America. I think at some points in time it was more real than others, right? Never fully real, but it's not real in 2024. And I think that it's really dangerous. I think that we're at this very dangerous point of people believing that we are a democracy simply because we have elections. Now, I want to be really clear. I believe very strongly in free and fair elections. I believe that, theoretically, if we're looking into the future and we have a revolution, I think that one of the first things that has to happen on the other side is you have elections, or else we end up in another cycle of authoritarianism. But that said, it is extremely dangerous to be in a situation where we go through the motions of an election and everybody says, oh, we have a duly elected government. No, we don't. And what is happening right now at the presidential level should terrify everybody, because we're essentially having like an authoritarian election, I think is the term for it. This is basically an election between two authoritarian figures, and they say democracy is on the ballot. No, democracy is over. Just because you hold an election does not mean that you are a democracy. And that's one of the main things that is very concerning to me about America in general. I don't think that there is a strong enough principled understanding of what democracy is. And that, to me, is part of what has been so frightening about witnessing the genocide in particular, is just the sheer number of people who I thought for sure would understand, we're not going to debate genocide. Surely we're not going to have a debate. And the amount of people that are just willing to just go lockstep with whatever their team captain says is very frightening. And I think that is where things like this, the essays, speaking up, the cultural production, the social media has been so tremendous in breaking through the noise. And I know this is the last thing I want to say. I don't want to take up too much time because I do want us to get more questions. But I do think it is important for us to realize how significant it is, because we are going up against a lot, and sometimes it feels like it's impossible and nothing's ever changing. It is so significant that we are at where we are in terms of shifting the narrative on Palestine. Like, that is incredible. And I think there's so much happening right now that it's almost difficult to take in, like how monumental that is, that we have gone up against the most powerful empire, all of the media completely, on one accord about what the story was going to be. And we managed to break through it. And it can't be undone. We have rung a bell that cannot be unrung. And so I just want to end here. Like, yes, we have to care about electoral politics. Of course it matters whether it's Joe Biden or Trump. Of course it matters who's in that seat. It always matters. It matters what particular individual is in that seat. Yes. But electoralism, I feel, in this country works to disempower people a lot. And I think that's exactly the intention of the people at the top. They want us to be disempowered. They want us to be depressed in the turnout. And then they can blame everything that goes wrong on us being depressed in our turnout, and not on the fact that they're never doing the things that we've elected them to do for 20 years. But that's another story, right? So I just want to say, like, don't allow it to disempower you. We have so much power. Yes, our vote is powerful, but it's actually not the most powerful thing we have. And I want us to be honest about that. Our vote is not the most powerful thing we have. When we shut things down, when we strike, when we make things inconvenient, that's when things move. That's when things open up. And I think we have to be more open and honest about that. I think there's been kind of a sense that, like, somehow we're disrespecting the people who fought for voting rights. And it's not that at all. We do respect that, but we've got to also acknowledge that the Voting Rights Act has been overturned. We don't have civil rights. Like, we have to be real about, and again, back to adaptability. You have to look at the times that we are in right now. It can't just be, I saw somebody write about this the other day that was very on point. Yes, we respect these people, we respect their thoughts, but we also have to contribute our own thoughts. We also have to look at, what are we facing in 2024? And electoralism is not a solution. It's not. We have to be honest. Any organizer, if you were going out and telling people that we are going to solve this through voting, it's just not true. That doesn't mean don't vote. That doesn't mean don't plug in. But we have to be real about, we can all turn out and vote, and they're going to try to overthrow the election. We already went through this in 2020. So I don't know, that probably didn't answer the person's question if they were trying to get a response on, what to do in this moment. But electoralism will not save us, and we have to be real about that.
I don't know if, Derecka, you have anything you want to add to this question about the electoral politics, but I just want to emphasize, I just appreciate your reminder earlier on, like the power when we are ungovernable, like the kind of power we get from that mobilization. I also just want to say I've gotten like tiny sparks of hope in Chicago from local municipal. We have elected a number of, non-professional politicians who are like socialist, queer folks, people of color. Not that identity makes analysis, but in this case, it's been really energizing, and that has pushed forward campaigns like treatment on trauma. That has pushed forward things like our removing the cops from Chicago public schools. Is it everything? No. But I think it has really also generated a different feeling in the city. It's not perfect by any means, but I think that has given me a tiny, somebody who has often thought that electoral politics is the weakest tool in our toolkit to build the world that we want, but, might be necessary, not sufficient, right? But I've gotten some energy from these local elections, from comrades like, yeah.
Yeah, and I want to support that wholeheartedly. Local. Yes, we leave a lot of power on the table at the local level, and that's by design too. Like, the presidential election is designed to suck up a lot of the energy, the money, the space, and then when folks are like, well, should we run a third party or independent? folks, we should be discussing whether or not we should have a president. Like we should be discussing whether, like, should any of this exist, honestly. But locally, yes, you can make so much change at the local level.
Yes. Anything on electoral politics before? There's just 2 more fab questions that I'm going to flag because our clock is running down. But Derecka, anything you want to share about electoral?
Yeah, I think this, again, is where I'm going to, think about a political home. I think the beauty of a political home is that you don't have to obviously agree, but this is, I think, a place to work out. I think that when I encounter people online or randomly on panels who are like, well, how should I vote? I'm just like, who are your people? Like, what's the strategy? So when I look at the uncommitted, like what happened with all those ballots in Michigan, I'm like, oh, that's like a particular strategy that's very important for that particular place, right? And watching other people model that as a strategy to say, oh, I'm not going to give Joe Biden my vote. This is ridiculous. Like, I didn't even want to vote for him last time, right? So watching people come up with different tactics to do that, I think that's when I'm excited. I think to Bree's point about how our ancestors get invoked, what pisses me off about that conversation is that it just narrows all the things our ancestors fought for, right? It's just like, well, whose ancestors, which ancestors, right? And the kinds of tactics that they were engaging in order to vote or secure the right to vote, and the kind of tactics that Bree just explained made that possible. So then people want to put all their energy in the vote and then condemn these other tactics that made the vote possible, right? When I think about, well, are your ancestors also Maroons? Were they also anarchists? Were they also like slavery insurrectionists, right? The people who were engaged in the struggle to get the Voting Rights Act, some of them were also not good people, right? And their ancestors too. Some of the women who were fighting to secure the right for suffrage were pissed off that Black men got it first. And so we do this thing where we romanticize ancestors, and it removes us from being a student of history and understanding how much more messy and how much more interesting or how much more problematic or how much more radical and beautiful these struggles were to secure some of the things that we have today. And how also it's not enough. Maybe I remember learning how much people were raising to run for president. I think this was around the time Citizens United, right? And I was just like, we probably should be focusing on the right to run. Because it would probably be much more interesting and much more democratic if you didn't need to raise, I don't know, $200 million to run for president. Think about other kinds of people who can't run, quote, and I don't believe in nation states, but just in the experiment that we have right now, how much more interested would it be if you didn't need money to run for president? Because the idea that you have to buy ads, that people are already picked, corporate lobby, all of this stuff, that's not democracy. Not at all. Not at all. So, yeah, find a political home, struggle around this, come up with a strategy. If you are morally convicted to not vote, don't vote. There's traditions of people like Move. I think about Move a lot in this context, who just refuse to vote and say, oh, this is wrong. This is all a sham. And instead built an intentional community, a climate community, a community committed to like rescuing animals and taking care of each other and fighting the police. Like there's so many traditions that we get to learn from and borrow from. And I would just encourage people to be a student of them.
Love that. I'm going to actually move to just a last kind of question around joy, which I really appreciate someone asking. I would like to hear about things that are giving Bree and Derecka joy in this movement. And I'm going to assume this is the abolitionist movement, the abolition feminist movement. What is sustaining you? What gives you joy and hope? And maybe we'll start with Bree this time.
Yeah, sure. It's the connection. Like I don't know how I would be coping right now if I weren't able to connect with so many other people who are also willing to engage in reality and not, obviously I have people around me that I love and, support and talk with, but when I think back to like earlier times where an event like this would have happened and there was no social media and there was no way to talk to other, and all you would see would be the lies on TV, like Iraq. It's changed a lot even since Iraq. I remember living through Iraq and I was like, this is, and I'm like in high school, I'm like, this does not seem right. And so I'm so grateful for that. And that, like when Derecka was talking about, like, creating the spaces where people can come together. If you are watching this, or, you are feeling like things are kind of hopeless, or you don't know where to plug in, that's where I would suggest, because not only is it giving you like political connection and education, but it reminds you that you're not alone. Like, we actually are the majority. We really are the majority. We are. We just have to organize ourselves so that we can have, the power to actually make the decisions. But if you are feeling like there isn't hope, that is what gives me hope. I truly believe we're going to win. I do. I have no doubt about that. And so, yeah, so I'll say thank you. Thank you to everybody, like whether we know each other or not. It does matter. And it helps when people remind me, like, your speaking out matters. And I appreciate everybody speaking out too, because it helps me continue to show up. I think it helps us all continue to show up.
Derecka, what's bringing you joy in abolitionist movements right now? And I'm thinking about all the people at Stateville Prison. We're closing supposedly in Illinois 2 maximum security prisons, and the governor just made the announcement that they want to spend $900 million on 2 new prisons to close these bad prisons. And so people inside, just last week, were saying, where's our $900 million college or university? Like, where's our $900 million mental health services in the state? So, what's giving me hope, just like you, Bree, is the brilliance and the amazingness and the creativeness of the people who are, in this work for the long haul. And I think that sustains me, brings me joy. We're sharp, we're right, we're our thinking is the thinking that is propelling me to get up every day and in a beautiful way. So I just want to lift up that, and thank you for that, Bree. But Derecka, what's bringing you joy and keeping you going in abolitionist work?
Wow. Yeah, I've been trying to not answer questions about what gives me joy, but rather what sustains me, because sometimes it's grief, sometimes it's inspiration, sometimes it's jealousy. I mean, all these things that make us human, and what sustains me. Joy is one of these important things that sustains me. And I really have been thinking about 2 big things. One of them I kind of mentioned earlier, around generation, really rethinking generation. And I have been so deeply moved from just the kind of like people I've encountered, I don't know, especially in the last 4 years around abolition, who are sometimes in their 50s, 60s, 70s, people in my family. My ex-husband's mom called me the other day. She's about to turn 70, and she went to a talk that one of my friends and comrades did about abolition. And she was like, I can't believe those people lie about defunding the police like that on TV, because that's not what I felt in that meeting. And so just really rethinking a generation, not as youthfulness or people who are yet to come, but people who are new to a movement. Because you can be a part of a new generation where you learn an idea and decide to be a part of a struggle. And that has been giving me a lot of sustainability. I've grown a lot from that. It's making me change my vocabulary of solidarity, and hopefully making me a better comrade, a better sibling, a better parent, better partner, all these things. But just really watching the kinds of people ask questions, and it really ranged across age, that has been sustaining me a lot. Other thing that's, I don't know if it's joyful, but I know that it's been challenging me. I've been thinking a lot about dispossession, and not just dispossession as in one group of people who have a lot of power, a lot of position, proximity to whiteness, stealing and taking from indigenous people or from people who collectively stood in place, but also what it means to be dispossessed, in the sense of like Ursula Le Guin, right, who writes about dispossession, and just broad anarchist literature really about dispossession as a source of liberation. And I remember in writing the book, I was reading all kinds of stuff, and one of the most surprising things I was reading was around critical psychology, about how when humans own things, what then they do in order to keep them, control them, and protect them. And that usually means violence, right? This is my property. This is my car. This is my home. This is my child. This is my wife. Like, as soon as we start developing this idea of ownership, it conditions us to do things that are harmful, right? And have been wondering, well, is there a way to think about dispossession in a way that's more beautiful and more interesting, that is not like minimalism, right? Because minimalism is like an aesthetic. Like, I'm going to have less, I'm going to have Instagrammable pictures, and that's enough. But I'm really thinking deeply about, well, what abolition, and I think ending capitalism and ending colonialism is going to require is for us to dispossess ourselves of our relationship to private property, including nation states. And that's been so liberating for me, especially as someone who grew up poor and Black, and my whole life I've been told that I have a right to accumulate, right? Not only do I have a right to, I deserve to accumulate. I deserve to possess. I deserve to own. And me owning things means that I'm going to have the same kind of, power and status as white people who've been able to accumulate on the back of my ancestors. And really finding myself attracted to people who reject accumulation, who reject ownership, who think about other ways of being in community and experimenting that. So that's the area of struggle where I am right now in my life. And that's been sustaining me a lot. And I've had to make some very powerful and challenging decisions as a result of what I'm thinking through right now. But I do think that if humans can figure out how to not possess each other, how to not possess property, how to not possess borders, it's going to just make us much more happier, much more thoughtful. Our response to suffering and violence, I think, is going to be completely different. And to know that forms of that have existed before, to know that it's possible now, it's possible to even greater degree in the future. And so that's what's sustaining me right now.
Oh, thanks for all of that beauty, reminding us, what we got to unlearn, and that, but also just reminding us that we're propelled not just by joy, but like I'm also angry every day. So, and that is the force. And then also just reminding us of, you were talking about intergenerational, but there's just so many ways in which people are coming to the work, and we often in movements kind of fetishize or pay attention to young people, but all of us are coming to the work at different moments. All of us that are listening, all of us that are doing the work, and staying open to that. I think it's really important. So I just want to thank both of you deeply for bringing anarchism and Ursula Le Guin and speculative work and imaginative work, and for filmmaking and for thinking, and for your brilliant and ongoing labors with other people, messy work to build, and intimate work to build the world that we know that we need. I just deeply appreciate both of you. I want to flag for our fabulous audience to get this great collection from Haymarket and Colin Kaepernick. We didn't even talk about the amazing Colin Kaepernick Publishing that this collection provides. I think many intimate and practical and uncomfortable and useful and sometimes aspirational and messy thinking from people who are doing shared collective work around building abolitionist presence and future. So I want to encourage people to pick that up. I want to thank all of you for coming out and listening, and for engaging these ideas, and for asking questions. And from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And I'm sending anger and joy to all of our listeners today, and deep gratitude for the shared work. And thank you to our fabulous team at Haymarket for making this happen. Thank you.